Hi, I'm Millie, and today in our concluding panel discussion for this afternoon, we're honored to host a talented duo of poets. It was originally going to be a trio, but I'm afraid Lynn Lawson is unable to come today. So we are so pleased to host two of these superstars of poetry on our stage this afternoon. Editors and poets Lynn Lawson and Gary Jackson, joined by contributing writer Gladys Raymond, who is about a month away from being inducted in our state's Literary Hall of Fame.
Hi, I'm Alicia. Gary Jackson is also a co-editor of The Future is Black and the author of the poetry collection Missing You, Metropolis, which received the 2009 Cave Canem Poetry Prize. His poems have appeared in numerous literary journals, including Caldwell, Tin House, Los Angeles Review of Books, and Crab Orchid Review. Mr. Jackson was a featured poet in our 2020 Pat Conroy Literary Festival, and we're grateful for this opportunity to host him again today. Gladys Raymond is a national renowned award-winning poet and a teaching artist traveling the world sharing and teaching poetry. Ms. Raymond is a Kennedy Center teaching artist and a Cave Canem poet. In 2020, she received the South Carolina Governor's Award for the Arts, and next month she will be inducted in the South Carolina Academy of Authors. Her work has been showcased on NPR and PBS, which has most recently published in Orient Magazine and the North Carolina Literary Review of City and Literature and Arts in the African Diaspora, Story South, About Place Journal, and Carolina Muse. Her latest book, The Listening Skin, will be published by Four Way Books later this year. Please welcome Gary Jackson, Gladys Raymond.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank all of you for coming here. And especially when we realize there's probably other things you could also do on a Saturday afternoon. So thank you for coming here and hearing us read and share some poems.
Yeah, I'm so excited, and thank you all. I have my grandson in the audience, and this is his first poetry reading, so he has him at home all the time. So I had to bribe him with a trip to Hunting Island this morning, so we got our beach trip in, and we realized that it got sunnier as the day went on. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you, Gary, for the invitation. And I'm so excited about this literary festival. Thank you.
Yeah, so before we say anything else, I think we should just jump right into the book, which is the reason why we're here. So I would love to have Gladys read her poem, but first I'll just say a little bit about the anthology. So as you might have heard being referenced earlier, we were originally a trio, but Lynn Lawson, who is also one of the co-editors, could not be here. He is currently on the side of Highway 95, waiting on a tow truck or some type of thing. So
sounds like a poem or a country song,
right? To help make up for his absence, I'll say a little bit about the anthology itself. I'd like to have Gladys read her poem. I'll read one of Lynn's poems and one of my own poems, and then we'll have a further discussion of the work. Thanks, Julie. And there's like a few kind of mini intros in the beginning of this. So I'll just read mine because I feel like I said it more eloquently when I had time to like think and write it down, as most writers do. So The Future of Black is a collection of more than 60 artists, writers, and poets imagining distant and not so distant future landscapes, reclaiming our histories, remixing established heroes and icons while creating new ones, and illustrating the everyday disasters and miracles of what it means to be Black today, tomorrow, and yesterday. But these poems are not meant to represent some monolithic block of Blackness. This anthology represents a wide range of aesthetics and voices where you'll rediscover established and upcoming authors, encounter poems you may have read before in new contexts alongside brand new work, and view illustrations by artists you may otherwise be familiar with in the four-color worlds of comics. Many thanks to the crew at Blair Publishing for giving this book a home, infinite gratitude to the many contributors who were willing to assemble in the following pages to bring this vision to life. Our hope is that this anthology offers multiple salves, words that call to action, images to inspire, a little escapism, and an invitation to join us in forging our own fantastic futures. without further ado, Gladys Raymond.
Thank you. I saw the submission for this coming through on email and decided to send something because the title of Afrofuturism, Black Comics and Superhero Poetry spoke to me. And I'm going to just read the poem that I decided. I sent in several, but this is the one that was published. And I just want to say a little bit before I read the poem. It's been an intense 2 years for all of us. And I also was battling stage 3 multiple myeloma cancer. And so my lifeline has always been poetry. And so what did I do in these last 2 years was to write. And this is one of the poems that I wrote while I was just processing what was going on. And I titled it, How to Become Your Own Superhero, or actually, Shiro. Facing death, I know that there is more to life than what we all can see. In the ethers, I hold on to invisible threads of what mama and grandmama passed down. Golden and silver cords of hope, courage, and faith. With multiple myeloma, I have lost more than the 20-year-old locks that hung down my back. I have lost my hand and heart extended for 27 years, taking poetry to students across the world. I lost the music in my smooth stroll. I have not danced for 10 months. I lost my breath, the capacity of my lungs, punished by pneumonia twice. I lost my hair. My bald head gets looks, outright stares. People cannot hide their questions or hide the horror scrawled on their faces. My self-portrait is a Frida Kahlo-esque painting. My illness turns me inside out, paints both the seen and unseen. I am surreal. I am lesions on skull, clavicle, and femur. I am cracked bone and marrow siphon. I am weekly blood draws. I have had to hold my own hand to save my own life. 2.5 million stem cells needed. I summoned 12.5 million. A record. You don't have to clap at that, Julie. Don't believe them when they say this procedure will not hurt. I am high-dose chemotherapy. If the cure of cancer does not kill me, I'll heal. The shadows on my face are maps of where I have walked, landings without light. 53 days later, I am lighter, a shapeshifter on this path I did not choose. Yet between the veils, I morph into this dreamlike mist. I feel like both angel and ancestor already. Time is surreal. I am glad to escape death this go-round, but I saw the Grim Reaper twice, his scythe ready to level me. I have come through this cancerous fire, finished in the kiln at the highest heat, a hard-won beauty lit from within. I duck and dodge and summon strength as a Wakanda warrior, a Maasai woman, southern sage. I meet the looks I get with a direct gaze, stare translated. If cancer couldn't kill me, you sure can.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll get more into kind of your aesthetics and that too after we read a couple more. So as an editor, I always have mixed feelings about putting our own work in like the books we edit. I always feel like it's like an excuse for us to like kind of show off. So I always have this weird uneasy feeling about it. With that said, I still did it. And I decided to include a couple poems that the other co-editors, Lynn in particular, really liked. And so I'm going to read a poem from my first collection called Luke Cage Tells It Like It Is. And if you don't know, or if you need some context, like Luke Cage is a Marvel superhero. I'm curious in the audience, like just a show of hands, is anybody here familiar with that character, like at all? Okay, a couple And so he was made during like kind of the blaxploitation era. Marvel Comics wanted to make like a superhero that was like Shaft and Dolomite and Foxy Brown and all these characters they saw in Hollywood that they were like, we could do that in comics. And they pulled it off about as well as you would imagine they could. So I wanted to write a poem about him and give him a bit of a voice that maybe he otherwise never had. Luke Cage tells it like it is. Don't believe everything you read. The exploits you find in my comic are no more probable than snow in Sunnyvale. I'm not as black as you dream. But a body has to make a living, and I play the part better than any. I know the dangers of believing every shade of black you see. In this issue, there's a mandingo of a man, dark like olives, voice as deep as a desert valley in the dead of night. He smiles as if he wants to bite your throat, holds back his teeth with those bubblegum lips that he can't help but lick, leaving the thinnest film of saliva on the surface. He's slick, and he's bold, and he's everything you imagine he should be. Sometimes you want to be him, want to see yourself in the silver gleam of his image, and other times you want to be wanted by him, crave his brand of desire, his form of righteousness, bringing a little black to the world, one motherfucker at a time. No matter how three-dimensional he seems, know that behind every jive turkey uttered, there is not a black mouth but a white one that dictates who he calls nigger to temper the perfect tone of black. This is the cruelest trick. Even now, I'm defined by the borders of my panels, the hue of sienna ink, an assembly of lines, a rendering of man splayed across your page. I should have did earmuffs. Would you? I'm sorry. I forgot all about the swearing in that one. Well, I'll pretend like you didn't hear it. All right. So I thought I'd close out too by reading a poem by Lynn Lawson, our esteemed editor who couldn't make it. And I really wish Lynn was here because he could set this poem up better than me. But he is fascinated with this character named Amanda Waller, who's an African-American character who exists in like the DC comic world with Batman and Superman. And he knows her backstory much better than I do. But she is like this top-ranking government agent that kind of organizes anti-heroes to do like assassinations and all these weird things, like very like black ops stuff, I think. But she's this powerful black woman who gets sometimes labeled as a villain, and then sometimes as an anti-hero. And so I think Lynn Lawson saw a lot of correlation between this fictional character, Amanda Waller, and someone like Condoleezza Rice. And he was informed and inspired by a Nikki Finney poem from Head Off and Split from her collection that's also about Condoleezza Rice. And so I'll just read one of the poems he wrote that's in this collection from the Amanda Waller suite with respect to Nikki Finney. Episode 1, Amanda Waller enters the war room. She Condoleezzas her way through the Pentagon with the stealth of a panther, visceral eyes peeled, mountainous shoulders arched, volcanic neck veined, and tongue triggered to strike at the first sight of a 5-star general. She's never fired a round, never donned a uniform, nor received gold or bronze. Let's call her black skin her badge, her tight, neatly edged afro her rank, her black heels the boots of war. It's not her impressive degrees that pierce men's egos, not her immaculate record of service under several presidential administrations that makes white men cower. It's not the armor of her power suits that remain tough as rhino's flesh. Angelou said it's the stride of her step. She glides with the confidence of 10,000 Valkyries in tow. The Negro spirituals would call her a battle axe, a bulwark, a buckler. She stampedes this polygon, not for love. Her countenance here will never endear passion, but fear. Not desire, but duty. She eclipses the dark room before aging white men reluctantly standing to her loathsome presence, daring not to trifle with her ominous right hand of wrath. How terrible is her name in all the earth that decorated warriors mask their terror. Thank you. And so I thought now maybe we could just talk a little bit, Glenn, about really whatever we want. It's kind of our show, but yeah, go ahead.
I just came to read a poem, but I'm game to talk poetry any day.
Yeah, and me too. Like I came here with the expectation that like Lynn would kind of run the show. Sure. Now it's like, oh, now we gotta like sound smart in his stead. So we'll rise up to the task. But yeah, maybe Glenn's like first, and we can both answer this question. But could you just talk a little bit about how, like maybe when or how you first encountered like kind of Afrofuturism or like Black speculative work, and maybe to qualify too. Oh, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I didn't mean to jump in. I'm just
go for it. Yeah.
No, well, Black speculative. I would start not with poetry. I would start with Octavia Butler. Everybody familiar with Octavia Butler? My brother is a big sci-fi fan, and growing up, and he was 4 years older than I was, but I never understood sci-fi. He loved sci-fi, and I never, until I picked up an Octavia Butler book. I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, and I read a book called Kindred. And the premise of the story is the woman who's in the book, she would get these, I don't want to give it away, but she could get these pains and then she would be transported back into the 1800s or something like that. And she was enslaved. And when I read her book, I understood what Octavia Butler was doing, that science fiction was not out there. It was a commentary on what was going on right here and now. And I think it's really wonderful that we're following up Dr. Hall and her research and her book, because the past and the present and the future are all compressed. And when Octavia spoke, I just said, well, this is how you understand history. This is also how you understand the present. And this is how you move into the future. And so that was my first brush of understanding myself that way, looking at work that way. Then Lucille Clifton's poems, the Superman poems. If you're not familiar with Lucille Clifton, please find her. She is, I consider her my literary mother. And the way she wrote about the Superman poems, and also wrote about shape-shifting, about her father, talking about sexual abuse, how one person can be two people or many people, gave me language of shape-shifting and those sorts of concepts and moving into that world. So I think Octavia Butler, I've read her body of work. If you follow it, I think there's a book that was published after she died, and Fledgling, which is the vampire book. And my brother, he says it's his favorite. I love it too, but Kindred is the one I just owe everything to. But I think you should just take time and just read all the way through, because she was a precursor in many ways. And I think I nod to her even before I get to Lucille Clifton. So those two women put me on the path of this work and writing in this vein.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And yeah, just to echo, like, and I have not read all of Butler's work myself, but Kindred is one of the books I did read. And then there was a graphic novel adaptation to it too, I think, that came out recently.
Yes, just recently, which I haven't gotten. So.
Yeah, and so, and you kind of stole my other answer, which was Lucille Clifton. No.
Oh, sorry.
No. She was the first poet, and so I guess I'm being very kind of narrow in kind of where I think of my literary ancestors, but But it was Clifton who I read when I was just starting to write poetry as an undergrad, and I grew up reading comic books, which is maybe my first real kind of introduction to the world of like speculative fiction in general. And Storm, and I could talk much more about that at some other point. We might have the time, but I don't know. But it was Clifton who wrote those Superman poems that we were fortunate enough to be able to get from her estate to put in this anthology. And one of the things I really liked about those poems that I had not seen before was a black woman kind of but a black woman kind of confronting this very, very white speculative world of like Superman. And so if you read the poems, they're in these like epistles, these letters that she writes to Superman. And they start with kind of this question of like, why doesn't Superman help people like me? And it goes into kind of this kind of quiet anger about why he won't help people like her. And the final poem, which is the poem that sticks with me the most because I still think of the lines, is she comes to this kind of empathy with Superman where she kind of understands him, she says, and the last few lines are something like, you can trust me, you can trust me,
there is no
planet stranger than the one I'm from. And yeah, and I had never thought that you could bring in such a superhuman like character like Superman into your world. It always seemed like for those characters, it's predominantly white superheroes, right? That the world revolved around them.
Right.
And I really loved that and was struck by how Clifton was able to kind of subvert that entire narrative trope. So yeah, that was, yeah.
She's such a master. Like, if you haven't looked at Lucille Clifton's work, compression is the element or craft element that she uses, and a lot of times people will consider her work plain spoken, but there's nothing plain spoken or simple about Lucille Clifton because she's always doing this like you said, subversive work. There's a poem by her, and I can't cite the poem from memory, but there's the line, why is there under this poem another poem? And it's really talking about, I think, African Americans in America that, I was trying to write about pastoral work, and that was one of the things in my graduate work. They said, well, I want you to write about a bucolic, just nature. And I couldn't get there. And it wasn't until I read Lucille Clifton is because the land whole is weighted. And there's all this terror in the land, and it's hard to get to just the beauty, that you had to get to all of that. Are you okay, Julian? Okay. Well, put your coat on. It's right there. Okay. Can you get some water?
Intermission.
Sorry. But that kind of move is what she's doing in these Superman poems, and it also gave me permission. I've been working on some Batman poems, but they haven't seen the light of day yet. But I've been going there because I love the whole concept of Batman not having a superpower and having fears. Not the whole money thing, because I can't relate to that. But but she was a forerunner, just opening the door in so many levels. So she's writing about our blackness. She's writing about, these heroes that are, readily accepted, but yet still we don't enter into it until to me it's another Octavia Butler move, just opening that door that we get to walk through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the time, too, when I was reading her poems, like this was in the early 90s, and so I'm sure, and Butler was doing this before Clifton, but just seeing her do that work as an undergrad, I just had no idea. I'd read white writers do that often.
Right.
She was the first black poet I had ever read do it.
Well, it's so permissive because you're like, I didn't know we could do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know we had, it gives you a sense of agency to go, oh, I can actually enter in and do that. So
Yeah.
that's why I say it's an Octavia Butler. Should I read some of the Lucille Clifton poems?
Sure.
Would y'all like to hear a couple of?
Yeah.
And you know, she doesn't capitalize, and she rarely puts a title
Yeah.
on her poems. So the first one is the If I Should. I don't know if I should read it or
You read whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I Should, and I'm going to read the title as if it's connected to the poem. If I should enter the house and speak with my own voice, at last about its awful furniture, pulling apart the covering over the dusty bodies, the randy father, the husband holding ice in his hand like a blessing, the mother bleeding into herself, and the small imploding girl. I say, if I should walk into the web, who will come flying after me, leaping tall buildings? You?
You want to keep going? You want to transition?
You want to go?
Oh, sure. I'll read one.
Yeah. It's your book.
I'll skip the second one. Go to the final note to Clark.
Okay.
Final note to Clark. They had it wrong. The old comics. You're only Clark Kent after all. Oh, mild-mannered mister. Why did I think you could fix it? How you must have wondered to see me taking chances, dancing on the edge of words, pointing out the bad guys, dreaming your x-ray vision could see the beauty in me. What did I expect? What did I hope for? We are who we are, two faithful readers, not Wonder Woman and not Superman.
Note, pass to Superman. Sweet Jesus, Superman. If I had seen you dressed in your blue suit, I would have known you. Maybe the choir boy Clark can stand around listening to stories, but not you, not with Metropolis to save and every crook in town filthy with kryptonite. Lord, man of steel, I understand the cape, the leggings, the whole ball of wax. There is no planet stranger than the one I'm from.
Thank you. Yeah. So now that we got to geek out on Clifton, we can. This is actually a good transition into the next question I was kind of thinking over, which is, could we both maybe talk a little bit about when we started kind of exploring kind of more speculative aspects in our own work, and if writing kind of these speculative stories maybe somehow also bled into like the more literary poetry, right? That we also write, and vice versa. Is that, yeah. Do you want me? I can start if you, okay, I'll start. Because for me, I feel like I was, when I was a graduate student, and I had a friend who committed suicide back when I lived in Kansas. And so when I was a graduate student at the University of New Mexico, I was writing these poems about this friend who had at that time relatively recently had passed away. And then I was also, though, writing these poems about superheroes. And the superhero poems at the time I thought were just a way to kind of entertain myself, right? To give myself a little bit of lightness in this work that otherwise was relatively, sobering and kind of dramatic. And I wanted to kind of push against some of the sentimentality that always kind of comes into play when you're writing about loss and elegies. It wasn't until like later, when I was still a graduate student, that one of my poetry mentors kind of told me, like, oh, these like two threads kind of work together. She was like, she's like, you're trying to escape from something. And she said, and your friend was also trying to escape from something. Yeah, and it just kind of hit me then, like, oh yeah, she's right, and that's always sobering too to have somebody else tell you how your own work is working. That's why you're a graduate student, probably. And so that really clicked for me. And these poems that at once didn't seem very grounded, the poems that were about superheroes, suddenly had this new kind of power. And they kind of spoke to me, and when I was workshopping them and showing them to other people, it kind of worked on this whole other level of this idea of trying to not just escape, but also kind of privilege and preserve these figures that were seen as juvenile and really weren't in a very real way. And we're kind of there to save me, at least the young version of me, and to kind of see the power in those worlds, the world of like superheroes in this kind of new light. And so yeah, that is really kind of what clicked for me, and I hate to say it, but I can't let it go now, because now I'm still writing those damn superhero poems, even though I've like moved on and I'm writing other poems now. And so, I mean, this anthology is also proof of that. It came out at the same time as a collection I was writing that isn't at all about superheroes, but I can't let it go.
I'm glad you're not letting it go, and I think that that's a beautiful thread, and to have someone to look at your work and make those connections. I think I'm much younger as far as in this work, because I'm just realizing the empowerment of it. Even though I've had the thread of Octavia Butler and Lucille Clifton and working on these Batman poems, I'm still kind of making my peace with it. I just finished a chapbook that's will be coming out next month. It's called The Three Harriets, and it's Harriet Tubman, Harriet Jacobs from Edenton, North Carolina, the enslaved woman in the attic for 7 years, abolitionist and writer, and then Harriet E. Wilson, first African American writer. And I believe that Harriet Tubman speaks to me the loudest for a lot of reasons. One, that she reminds me of my grandmother who died when she was 109. And so I feel like her creative muse is around me. And I say all that to say my journey is now I feel like using history and talking about these women and understanding that there's a lot of facts with Harriet Jacobs and Harriet E. Wilson, but Harriet Tubman, there's less so that's documented. So there's a lot of places in between with Harriet that you can go. And I feel like that's one of the places I want to go with this work. Is I think she was one of our first super sheroes. Like the way she was hit in the head by one of her owners, and she had visions and dreams. And I'm primarily grounded in South Carolina history and stories, family, lineage. And so I really want to start doing some of this work that we're placing on superheroes and super sheroes with Harriet Tubman, and that, especially in Kusawachi and the 2 years that she spent here. And so I find I'm kind of still straddling the world, but I also want to take Black women in history and to talk about Afrofuturism, if that makes
Yes.
I got a clap from Dr. Hall, something I got an amen. But because I'm like, how futuristic was Harriet Tubman? I mean, she was doing this incredible work. I know, you think about the ancestral, powers that she was under. And I think it was her mother who came over on a slave ship, the Modesty. It was her grandma Modesty came over. So she got a lot of her knowledge from her. So I'm very interested in how that plays out. And so reading these poems and this anthology and hearing you talk gives me permission to continue to move forward in that vein. And Dr. Hall, hearing you talk today was so inspirational about the women and revolt. So I think that has a place in a space that hasn't fully been fleshed out poetically in my work, but that's where I want to go.
Yeah, no, I would read that. I would, yeah, definitely.
And I apologize for my grandson, but he's doing the best he can. And I want to slide in that the other thing that's on television right now on Netflix There's 2 series. It's Raising Dion. I don't know if has anybody seen that?
Yeah.
It's a little black boy who has superpowers, right? And I think this was during COVID was really important for Julian and myself, and for him to see himself in a young black boy who had superpowers. Have you seen it?
I haven't. I know the show though, but I haven't seen it yet. They just had a second season.
Second season, right? And so I just to watch him watching something that we did not have, or I did not have, or my brothers did not have, has been pretty monumental. And I just, the power of that, whether you like the show or not, it's doing some incredible work. Having this young character who has these superpowers.
Yeah, and I love too, Glennis, what you said about just you kind of answered my last question already, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can kind of expand and open up this idea even of Afrofuturism, because I feel like so much of the time people think of it as just sci-fi with black people, right? And that's such a reductive way to think about it. And so I love what you said about how it's also not just looking towards the future, but looking at the places and the landscapes that we already existed in, and kind of the miracle of being, a black woman during slavery, a savior, a prophet, you know what I'm saying, like a miracle worker. And even in your poem, one of the things I wanted to say too was that poem that you read is so much about the miracle of the black body now, today, your body, right? And how you're a superhero, which I know probably sounds corny to say, but it's true, right? And I feel like so often when we talk about Afrofuturism, we don't think about just the miracle of living today is just as marvelous and amazing and incredible as having superpowers, right?
I had no problem writing that poem because when you're in it, fighting for life, it doesn't feel like hubris, right? It feels like, okay, so this is a lifeline. This is something I'm trying to do to stay alive, and to actually see myself in the future, which would be maybe next year or maybe this March, considering, where I was last March with no hair and, surviving a stem cell transplant. So I think there is a future in Afrofuturism, and it doesn't have to be far future. It's the near future and what our young people are facing. And even when I think about Julian, being privy to the history that he hears, and just Black Lives Matter, and what does that mean? I was talking to the young high school students, I'm an NPR person, so I always got NPR on, and I have to turn it off just because of him sometimes, because they're saying someone who's died, or a young black boy, and he's like, black boy, does that mean me? And so just to have a tool or a skill to see yourself into the future is something I think should be adopted and not taken away, and it's not juvenile. And that's what, going back to my brother and my relationship, my brother, we both read comics. He was Marvel and DC. I was Archie and Casper the Ghost, and I was all the girly comics. I don't know what.
Don't say that. No.
But I mean, I wish we would have saved all those comic books. We would be millionaires right now. We had the 5 centers, the 10 centers, and my father was in the Air Force, so we lived overseas, and we did not have television, so we read, and comic books was our first foray into.
He's got something to say too.
So it was our first. Want to say something? What is it that you need to say to him?
Thank you all.
He's really struggling because this has been 2 hours. But thank you, Julian, for.
He's born to be a showman himself.
Oh my gosh, he's so extroverted. It's driving me crazy. But anyway.
I was gonna say, you made me think of my own mother, because she gave me her comics. She just had a few,
oh, wow.
And I know I saved them somewhere. And it was Archie, Conan, Thor, and Doctor Strange, I think, and Baby Casper. So she had a very eclectic kind of sense about her. So yeah.
Cool grandmother though, because my mother and father saw all of that as foolishness. comic books, like, why don't you put that away, and get into the real stuff. And my brother just went, he was Star Trek and Star Wars, and he just kind of kept going down that path. And now, to circle back, I realized what my brother was doing. It wasn't escapism. We lived in a very tumultuous home, and we both were escaping in our own ways. But it was a tool to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that this type of writing is a tool of survival and a way to not just survival, though. I also think about thriving. The
Yes.
beauty, finding joy in places where you're not supposed to be here. And that's where I even think about with Harriet. How did my question with Harriet is how? How did you do this? How did you do this 19 times? I mean, but there's always these moments, and when I read work about her, I always sense humor in her work, which we don't always get when we're bare bones survival. But these were individuals, these were people, and they had the full range of emotions and experiences. And so that's what I think we can do with this work is, and what Lucille Clifton is doing with this sly wit, the side eye to Superman, and I think it's important to have that full range, because I love a documentary, but at the same time, I want some humor in that, I want the thread that keeps you going, and I think this work allows for that.
Yeah, no, thank you, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's so much emphasis on, I feel like a lot of young poets think they have to focus on suffering and trauma to make it good.
Right.
It's like, no, and especially Black poetry, it's like we are more than just suffering and trauma. We are joy, Black joy, Black triumph. Those are just as important. Hope.
I think they go hand in hand, like you were saying. How can you experience this joy without the resiliency, the struggle? It makes the joy richer and stronger. So it's not to turn your head from that, because you really want, with the banning of works right now, I think, people, I believe that there's such a wealth of information that has not been explored. And we have to navigate that, no matter how uncomfortable that makes us, because I think it makes us, I know it makes us stronger to navigate all of that, and then come through it. And we come through it as stronger individuals, a stronger community, stronger nation, because I do think we need truth and conciliation here in this country, and that it would help us all. And I think that's what literature is doing. Literature is a form of, this reconciliation. And it starts on an individual level, and then that's what's beautiful about this anthology, because we're not a monolith, we all think differently, but there is a committee of folks speaking, and there's this truth in it.
Yeah, I could not have said that better. So I think we should open it up now. I think there's only maybe 10 minutes or so left for us for like a Q&A if anybody has questions. If not, we'll keep talking, go ahead, John.
Jerry, I wondered if you would talk about the process of selecting work and recruiting work for the anthology. It seems to honor existing voices who are established in this genre, but also maybe invited in some writers you didn't know were doing this work. So can you talk about that process?
Sure. Yeah, just to kind of repeat it so everybody can hear, just Jonathan asked for me to say a little bit about just the effort in putting this anthology together. And, I'm trying to think about maybe the best way to talk about it. But, from a very practical level, we thought that what we wanted to do was kind of make this, we had our list of poets that we had dream writers, writers we would love to have in. And Clifton really was kind of the center, because when Lynn invited me in, I was like, well, you have to try to get something from Lucille Clifton. She has these Superman poems and they're great. And from there, we just kind of went through, Terrence Hayes has a poem called Shaft Row that one of the editors Cynthia loves that poem. I could go on and on, but
A. Van Jordan.
Yes. Yeah, A. Van Jordan, who's African-American poet who has a collection called Quantum Lyrics, which is about the Flash and Green Lantern and Albert Einstein. Anyway, so we had all these poets that we wanted, and then we thought we should open this up to any and all poets who want to submit. And it sounds like, Lynn, that's where you saw the open call, right? Yeah. And so we had poets send in new work while we were also soliciting some new work, but if poets had previously published work, that was fine too. And then we went through the process of kind of like putting all these poets together. I will say one of the things I'm so thankful for is that as co-editors, we were never quite sure what the best equitable way to go about choosing poets would be. And we ended up landing on just simply, if Cynthia said she liked this poet and she liked these poems, it didn't matter what Lynn and I thought. We were going to trust her vision. And the same courtesy was extended to all of us. So as long as one of us was like, there is something here, that poet went in the collection. Later, once we paired up with Blair, we also got the idea that we would like to feature illustrators. And we were like, for a book that's about kind of, comic books and Afrofuturism and, and superheroes, we should probably have some visual component. And we didn't know if we could do that because before we even had a press, we weren't sure, is it going to be full color, things like that. And once Blair agreed to that, they kind of had a Rolodex of artists that they could ask, and then we went through that process too and kind of asked artists, solicited them to send us work, and ended up pairing it up in really surprising ways. And so everything else kind of fell in place pretty easily. Like Lynn did a lot of the work in organizing the sections. So if you look in the anthology, you can see there's like women-centric narratives, superhero narratives, kind of Black speculative sci-fi specific narratives, Black superheroes, like they're kind of arranged in these various categories. And even that was kind of fun because sometimes a poet would say, I don't know if I belong in this narrative, like put me over here in this other narrative, which we were all for. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question. I mean, I could go on and on about the process. It was a while. I will say the pandemic in some ways really helped because when all of this happened, when we were doing this work, it was right as the pandemic started. And so it really gave, I think, all of us something we could work on that in a way kind of kept all of us a little bit more sane than we otherwise would have been, during these past 2 years. Gladys looks like she wants to.
No, I just think it's quite beautiful. That's all I was going to say. If you've got it and leafed through it, it's really beautiful. I just had turned to page 188. There's a picture of Octavia Butler, 73rd birthday, by John Jennings. I just think it's stunning. So I'm so glad that it's in full color.
Me too. I mean, y'all need to hold this book because it is a showstopper. Like the pages are so glossy.
It's
slick.
Magazine slick.
Yeah, I don't know how they did it. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, people were getting their copies before I got my copy, and they were putting them on Instagram, and I was like, "Where's my copy?" And then when I got it, the heft of it is, true book lovers, you love the whole book, right? You love to smell a book, you love to feel a book, and other people might think that's strange, but this is a quite astounding book. And one of the beautiful things when I got the book, Julian was with me as he always is. He saw the 2 Black boys on there, and he's like, oh, those are my friends. And I thought, this is a wonderful cover as well. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, shout out to Najee Dorsey, who contributed that cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
You like to see it too?
It's a tactile experience. Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, thanks for making that connection about the superhero narrative with Harriet Tubman. I never put those two together, but with them being hit on the head and the visions, it's like the radioactive spider. Exactly. I'm actually taking a research trip in a couple of days up the Combie River to trace where she did that raid for my upcoming book.
Oh my goodness.
Except for the person with the boat, like flakes. I don't know how exactly, but anyway. But I was wondering what you thought about, Afrofuturism was something that was kind of new to me, and I'm learning it still. But in addition to comics, there's this whole other academics are talking about it in all kinds of really interesting ways. But for me, like, I think what really resonated with me is Janelle Monae.
Yes.
I was reading an interview with her, and it was like, you know, what do you think about all the stuff that's happening? And she's like, well, I'm from the future. So I don't, and it just made me think about how, like, inhabiting some kind of alternative temporality is so, it's kind of like a survival thing. And I wanted to know if you're familiar with her, obviously I'm shaking your head, but of her song like Django Jane, and yeah.
Yeah, I am, and I think, you know, I'm not familiar with all of her work, but I think that she is inhabiting a space that I think is important, and I don't always, I'm still new, I don't always get everything, and I know there's this, especially just last month, you know, with Black History Month versus Black Futures Month, which I don't think it needs to be a division. It's they ride in there together, but that's really all I can say on that.
Yeah, I didn't even know about the Black Futures Month versus Black History Month.
Yeah, there's been a little bit of
I didn't know it was a versus. I thought it was.
No, it is together, but there has been people who are like staunchly, you can't take my Black history. You know, when no one's taking Black history,
Okay.
we're bridging it, you know, with the future. But I can see where Janelle Monae would be staunchly with all of her visuals, her music, her videos, and she has a book out with a poet from, if I'm not mistaken, and who's the poet?
I don't know. Now I'm off the spot. Yeah, I don't know who the poet
Kyle
is.
Dargan.
Oh,
Washington,
really?
DC.
Is it
There's
Kyle
some-
Dargan?
But he's done some collaboration with Janelle Monae.
Okay.
Yeah, something with the book.
Well,
so
lucky
I
man.
haven't gotten it. I haven't cracked it open. So.
Yeah, and I was just looking through the anthology because there is like a kind of syllabus, like additional sources that Lynn, I think, primarily put together, and it has music and film in here too. But you know, I was just on a podcast earlier this morning, and it was talking about the same theme, and there were musicians on the podcast, and they were talking about Janelle Monae. But they also reminded me, of course, of like Outkast, like their second album, A.T. Aliens, and you know, of course, Parliament Funkadelic and the Mothership.
My very first concert.
Yeah, Sun Ra. You know, like there's such a rich history there in terms of Afrofuturism and music and this idea of the mothership and going back, you know, home, going back to outer space because Black people are destined for bigger things than just Earth. And I feel like Janelle Monae is very much in that vein. Yeah.
And then you have to go to African tribes like the Dogon tribe, and you know, there's just so much like who, if I'm not mistaken, right, are pre-literate, but understood astrology, and it would be on caves, and like, how is this happening? You know, so I think people are on this. It's a trajectory, you know, and it didn't start here with us. It's ancient,
Right.
you know, and so I think we're borrowing from those lines and that lineage as well.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Those were beautiful readings, and it's been a lot of fun to hear the conversation between you. I think I heard Kaveh Khanum mentioned in both your bios. Is that
Yeah.
right? And for those of us who are involved with the Pat Conroy Literary Center, it would be really lovely to hear you talk about, for people in the audience who don't know, Kaveh Khanum is a wonderful organization founded by Toy Darracott and Cornelius Eady to support Black writers and black poets and Black community. So I'd love to hear from both of you, if you would. What do you think are the most important things Kaveh Khanum enabled you to do, or helped you, or supported you do?
You want to go first, or you want me to?
You know, Kaveh Khanum was one of those places I felt like I always needed to get to as a writer. I was living in Asheville, North Carolina, which was, you know, predominantly white. And Asheville opened its arms to me. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. That's where my roots are. But my wings, I gained in Asheville because the community was so liberal and open, and inclusive in many ways. Racially, it just wasn't there, you know? And so I always found myself, even after going to Warren Wilson, getting my MFA, I always felt like I needed to get to Cave Canem because I needed to be around a circle of Black folks who were writing and creating, and I knew it would help me in my own personal, not just writing, but what I needed to, people who I needed to stand next to. And what I found in Cave Canem was a sister and brotherhood, but also, like, it is true what you said in the opening, we're not a monolith. There was everybody from any walk of life that you could think of who was writing poems, you know, versus class, versus skin tone, versus academia, you know, and performance poetry, and somewhere in the middle. It was just the whole thing. And it empowered me because it was the first time I sat in a circle to hear and talk to people where I didn't really have to explain what I was doing. And I was in workshops where I didn't have to explain what my narratives or why I was obsessed with a certain aspect of history. And you know, I wasn't told like you shouldn't write about that or that's been done. It was more of course you're writing about that, and here are some other ways you can explore this. And so that's what Cave Canem did for me. Created that.
Yeah, the same. You know, like when I went, that was probably the first experience I'd ever had being around other Black writers and poets, and just having permission, like Gladys was saying, and not even just permission to write about my life, but yeah, like that idea that we are not a monolith, right? So like poets there were writing about things that weren't necessarily like overtly Black, right? And so this idea that you can be too Black or not Black enough, you know, all that stuff gets thrown out when you're at Cave Canem, right? Like nobody's telling you that one way or the other. And I think for a lot of us there, that was something probably we hadn't heard before, that we had permission to kind of write our stories no matter what they were. And the fact we were writing them was proof enough that there was value in them.
Have you done a count of how many Cave Canem people are in here?
I haven't, you know,
that would be an interesting,
yeah, probably like half. I'm gonna guess, and but probably even much more. And yeah, and I had won the Cave Canem Poetry Prize back in 2009, and to answer your question about how it's affected me, I mean that just simply changed my life. You know, like when I won that was.
What is it?
So it's a good question, good follow-up question. So what is it? You know, like what was said earlier, like it's a fellowship founded by Tori Derricott and Cornelius Eady. The fellowship does a lot of work like in the community in New York City, but it's since branched out to everywhere. They have fellowships, they have residencies. One of the other things they do, though, is they have this annual prize where only Black poets can send their manuscripts, and one will get selected by a nationally renowned poet every year. And the history of the prize itself is quite storied because the first Cave Canem prize was in 1999, and the judge was Rita Dove, if anybody knows who Rita Dove is. And the young poet she chose was a young poet named Natasha Trethway, who won, who was poet laureate. And so I won the 2009 prize that was judged by Yusuf Komunyakaa. And yeah, simply it changed my life. Like it's a very, it has a lot of weight, that prize. And thanks to that, you know, like I was able to get a tenure track job or, you know, whatever like these opportunities started opening for me. And we could talk about like how, you know, the market and literary, you know, the world of, you know, writing can get very kind of suffocating and, you know, nepotistic and things like that. But I will say that when I won that prize for that manuscript, I was no one in the sense that I was not some name. And later, one of the directors, it wasn't Cornelius or Toy, but she confessed to me that when Yusuf chose my book, a few of them was like, "Who the hell is Gary Jackson?" Like, some dude in Kansas. Who is this guy? And so it showed, that demonstrated to me that it really was a prize that was based on you know, what they saw as talent and not necessarily like some known name.
Right,
You know?
and I think it is the first prize. Like, so
Yes.
you couldn't have written a book before, so it's an unpublished author.
Yeah, correct. It's a first book prize. You have to be unpublished to win. Other questions? Julie's got a question. There you go.
Fan fiction always gets treated so dismissively as sort of this lesser thing, but do you find that to be the case with your superhero poetry? Do other poets sort of look down on that as somehow less? I mean, the collection speaks to how literary superhero poetry can be, how powerful it is, how essential it is. Fan fiction doesn't have a champion the way that poetry seems to. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I feel like I never have a good answer for it because even in my classes, you know, I teach at the College of Charleston, and I teach like undergraduate and graduate creative writing courses. But even there, I'm always a little amazed that like the camp of like kind of genre literature never seems to affect poetry. So like if you're writing like prose, someone will say like, oh, this is just fan fiction because you're writing from the point of view of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Storm or someone. Or they say like, oh, you're writing a horror story, as if a horror story means that it shouldn't be, you know, next to literary fiction, right? And in poetry, that never seems to come up. Like in poetry courses, like students are writing things that have horror themes, that have superheroes, that have established characters, and no one ever says like, oh, this is a X genre type of poem. Like all of those poems kind of coexist next to each other. From the generation of them in a workshop to, you know, when they're published out in the world, like. And I don't necessarily know why poetry is able to shake off that, and part of it might be what is kind of a double-edged sword, where I feel like poetry is such an open vessel that especially young writers sometimes confess to me that they feel overwhelmed when they enter a poetry class for like the first time, because a poem can be anything. And they hear their peers, you know, and they say like, well, that's narrative, but this poem isn't narrative. This poem is experimental. This poem is about Superman. This poem is about like an autobiographical account of something, right? So how can all these things be a poem? And so I feel like because it's such an open vessel that there's room for things like fan fiction to exist there that otherwise seem to get stigmatized more in like prose, right? But I don't know if that's a good answer or not, you know, like, yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else? I think that's our time then. Thank you, Gladys Raymond.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here.
We do have copies of The Future of Black available upstairs, and Gary and Glennis will very happily sign.